Welcome back, and joining me for a closer look at what's played out on the market scene today is Muhammed Wagley from Sasfin Wealth. Thank you so much for your time, Muhammed. Yeah, still beginning of the week. What market catalysts are you eyeballing as the week unfolds, seeing that there's just, I don't know, anticipation for a lot to happen this week?
Good afternoon, Zanati. Always a pleasure to be on. Look, I think in that respect, we have seen a bit of a quieting down sort of on the Q2 earnings. So really, it's the big macro stuff. I think off the top of my head, we've got the FOMC meeting minutes later today. I think within the context of everybody pricing in a rate cut in September, it'll be good to see sort of what their lines of thinking were just in holding steady in July. Obviously, we had two dissenting votes there as well, coincidentally, both sort of Trump appointees. So it'll be interesting to see what they're taking out from the data and maybe get an indication of what the Fed's tone will be if and when they do decide to cut rates in September. Is that going to be because, they managed to navigate the inflationary environment well and, maybe tariffs is a bit of a nothing burger? Or is it going to be that, look, we're expecting inflation to tick up. It's going to be a lot stickier than it was, and we need to do this from a growth perspective. So how they shape that is going to have a huge impact. We've got the FOMC meeting minutes tomorrow, I believe, and then at the end of the week, the Jackson Hole Symposium. So I think inflation is going to be dominating the discourse for the balance of the week. But again, you've always got the wild card, which is President Trump. And, we had some relatively, I thought, relatively positive news in that respect, just on the Russia-Ukraine war front. So hopefully taking steps towards some sort of peaceful resolution there. We've already seen some action on the oil price, but if we get new news, I'd imagine that's just the start.
Okay, yeah, very, very interesting. And of course, we are keeping a close eye on those developments when it comes to geopolitics between Russia and Ukraine. More meetings there that are planned, and hopefully we can get to a peace deal at some point. Well, let's take a look at some of the company news that came out of the JSE today, and I guess last night after market close. Lots of resources actually there. But before we get to resources, let's actually start off with construction Avenge. Pretty small one, coming out with annual results. Of course, we know the headwinds that the construction industry faces, and I guess this period was no different. Top line softening by double digits, that trickling down to a headline loss that's widened. That share price, though, did surge at some point by 8%. I did see, though, that it did come back. I think it was up about 2%. What did you get out of those results?
Yeah, so look, lots of price movements here. I think, just briefly having gone through them, there may have been quite a few red flags that were going off in investor heads, especially within a JSE sort of context. So where we saw a lot of that weak performance with the relatively sort of new divisions which they've got in Southeast Asia, the business unit over there, and the hydroelectric dam in Australia. And I think to a large extent, those projects were sort of underpinning the poor performance that we saw sort of from a top line perspective. And I think whenever sort of a local investor sees that sort of rhetoric, what goes off in your head is, wow, another sort of JSE listed company that went overseas and is just not seeing those projects materialize the way they wanted it to. I think on the back of that, we saw quite a bit of panic set in, and, in terms of price action, there was quite a substantial loss as well. I think we're seeing quite a bit of movement today, or upward movement at least, just on the back of maybe the fact that was a little bit overdone. That being said, it's not like it was great news. It was bad news, just perhaps not as bad as the market was pricing, and there wasn't really too much to like here. But I think, again, it's coming off sort of the relatively low basis of the past couple of days, and that's really what's dictating the price action today.
Okay, well, let's go into resources, looking at diversified miner BHP also coming out with results, annual results. They're saying that they achieved record copper and iron ore production, but revenue softening, of course, that also filtering then through to headline earnings, which declined. The share also, they're climbing 2%, even though we did see declines in the financial metrics. What did you see in that report?
So I'll make reference to something I saw CEO Mr. Mike Henry
Yeah.
speaking to a little bit earlier today, and that was, in terms of what the company can actually control, so the operational capacity, efficiencies thereof, they've actually done phenomenally well. What they can't actually control is sort of the actual price. They've got to take the price that is set by sort of the demand, that is prevalent in relation to these goods. Now, they did make mention, and you did mention this earlier as well. We saw some weakness, I think, from India, China, but it does look like that demand is expected to come back. I think operationally, there was quite a lot to like here. Just one thing I'll touch on is you mentioned, well diversified. Soon enough, it's just going to be two things. Hey,
Yeah.
copper now constitutes nearly 45% of BHP earnings, the vast majority of the rest coming from iron ore. So it's looking like not in the not too distant future, it will really just be those two things making up the vast majority of the earnings there. This has obviously been an active push by the company, for the past 3-4 years or so. So that's actually materializing, and I would say one of the things that was there to like in these numbers. I think nominally speaking, from a top line perspective, yes, profit did decline. I think it was a 20-odd%, but broadly speaking, that was expected. So sort of same with the dividends as well. So maybe nominally it didn't paint the prettiest picture, but from an operational perspective, they've really done well. I've got to say there was quite a bit to like.
Okay, well, talking about a miner that just has two things, Harmony is actually going there as well, because they're saying they're not just focused on gold, which has benefited them a lot, but they're going into copper as well. And there was a regulatory body that approved the acquisition of MAC Copper. Could Harmony just be a powerhouse at this point?
It's quite interesting. Look, I wasn't sort of too aware of,
Yeah.
this overarching strategy to get into the space. Now, nominally, it does make sense to me. I think just the one thing that I'm worried about is, they've got all these different geographies, and now they're sort of adding a new one, really on the other end of the world, and a somewhat different industry as well. In terms of the quality of the mine, I think there's a lot to like there. But I think there's also still quite a few question marks in terms of, how this is going to play out, how long, before it is profitable, just a lot of questions in relation to that. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yes, they are seeming that way, very much like a powerhouse, but I
Okay.
do have quite a few reservations just in terms of this specific acquisition into a space that they've not really been in before.
Okay, yeah, very, very interesting points that you raised there. Before we get to your stock pick, let's take a look at Northern Platinum. They came out with their year-end trading statement after market close yesterday, expecting their headline earnings per share to slump by almost 20%. One of the things that the company highlighted is mining cost inflation. We did see the stock down about 5% today, actually maybe even more than that. Just put this update into context for us.
No, it's a bit interesting, right? I think what we've been hearing about platinum over the past few months or so is just how phenomenal the performance has been there. We've seen pickups in demand. There's much has been made about an increase in Chinese demand, but these are full year earnings, and a lot of that will make reference to sort of the second half of last year, and I think that needs to be kept sort of at the forefront of our thinking when we are looking at sort of these numbers. It wasn't just them that have seen sort of increases in those all-in costs, and that has put pressure. It does look like the outlook going forward is a little bit better, and I think that's a bit more of a reflection of what we've been seeing just in terms of the PGM miners and prices this year. But it wasn't necessarily too much of a surprise to me that those costs were weighing on them. I think maybe the quantum of those costs affecting their margins is maybe what spooked the market a little bit, in that we did see quite a visceral reaction on the share price today. But ultimately one has to bear in mind the context that even after the 7-8% odd drop that they felt today, they're still up 100% or thereabouts very handsomely this year. So still in a good position. They're still where they want to be. So yeah, I didn't see too many causes for too much concern.
All right, we're talking about position. Where are you positioning yourself today, your stock pick, Mohammed?
I've gone with something a little bit different. I think usually I'm exclusively picking American companies, and on the odd occasion that is not American, I will go for a JSE one. But I'm going to go for something a little bit different today. I'm choosing Mercado Libre, which is a South American company that is Latin America's largest e-commerce platform. I think most commonly I've heard it referred to as the Amazon of Latin America, and Mercado Libre, the name really just means free market, so a relatively apt name. But bottom line is that, look, they've got the largest marketplace in Latin America, greater than 50% market share in Brazil and Argentina, close to that in Mexico as well. Those are, obviously the two biggest sort of markets in that space. And in terms of their fintech offering, they've got a great offering. Mercado Pago, which is their division, is the most widely used digital payment sort of ecosystem in that area. That includes wallets, QR payments, points of sale. There's really a lot to like with this company. It's very future looking as well. I don't think it's too expensive. And the one thing that I'll touch on is I think often enough people think, well, what happens when Amazon gets there? Well, Amazon has been there. All the other, I think Alibaba's there as well. And what this company has over the others is that they've got a sort of moat in that their infrastructure has already been set up all throughout the continent, and they're well ahead of the others in that respect. And I think they'll sort of maintain a solid positioning there. Don't think it's too expensive. I think this is a phenomenal company, and one that's at the very least worth looking into if you've not heard about it.
Well, thank you so much for that very, very insightful conversation, Muhammad. Really, really appreciate your time. That was Muhammed Wagley from Sasfin Wealth.